Okay, it looks like we have a good number of participants who have already joined, so let's hop right into it. Welcome, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. My name is Johnny. I'm a product manager at Excite. Joining me is David Danto from Talking Points, and today we'll be talking about what the AV market can learn from SaaS. So, brief introduction about myself. I've been in SaaS for the past 10 years, in product roles, in analytics roles, um, structured data, unstructured data, hardware, software, kind of all over the place. And I'm happy to bring my learnings from the past decade to analytics for hardware and AV. David?
Thank you, Johnny. Good to be with you today. I've been working in the collaboration and media industry for more than 4 decades at this point, as an end user on the sell side, and now as an industry analyst with Talking Points, talkingpoints.com if you're interested. And always love to chat with people in the industry.
Great to have you, David. Thanks. So let's briefly recap our agenda for today. So after a brief introduction about what is analytics and how are software companies using analytics, we're going to be talking about how is this relevant for AV? Why now? How can the different players in the supply chain apply analytics to AV and to their needs and use cases? We'll give a few examples of such use cases, both hypothetical and real world, and then we'll be talking a bit about tech stack recommendations before hopping over to the Q&A. So let's talk a bit about analytics. What is analytics? What do software companies do with analytics, right? We're talking about SaaS, software as a service companies as leaders in the space of analytics. They've taken what used to be a one-off business model. You used to buy software together with your computer. If you go back to the days of Windows 95, you just bought that at registration when you bought the computer itself. And today everything's become a subscription. You subscribe for software, it keeps getting updated, and you pay monthly or annually, but you no longer buy it once at a time, but rather you subscribe to it continuously. So because customers are no longer obligated to use your software if they don't like it, then SaaS companies live and die by metrics, by measuring will my customers renew? It's no longer about just creating revenue, but it's also about making sure that customers don't churn. When we say churn in SaaS, what we're referring to is customers deciding that your software is no longer good enough for their needs and they decide to stop paying, use another solution, or maybe even use no solution. So revenue is great, but churn is a very important metric that SaaS companies use to make sure that they have a stable source of revenue. So what kind of information are we talking about? We're talking about customer interaction data. It could be the customer settings in the software. It could be their configurations, how they've configured the different capabilities you've given them. What features are they using? Are they adopting them? How long it takes them to use such features? Do they realize that the new feature has dropped and they use it, as soon as it goes live? Or does it take them a long time because there's not enough kind of flashing signs saying, hey, check out this new feature and give it a shot? This can come as structured data, which sits in a tabular format, and it's much easier to query and analyze. And there's also unstructured data, which can be of any shape, any shape or form, images, videos, and what have you. So these are the type of data that customers, or sorry, software companies use to measure their performance. And then they try to tie in those product metrics, if you will, with business metrics, with things like customer acquisition, customer churn, lifetime value, and so on. Let's talk about a few examples for how what this looks like in SaaS. So if we're talking about product usage starts from basic feature adoption. We've launched a new feature. How many of our active customers are using that feature, have used it at least once, have returned and used it multiple times, come and use it day in, day out? Are there areas with user struggle? Do they bump into error messages? Are they misusing it? You can sometimes actually see what that usage looks like in a very granular way and understand that the customer either doesn't understand or understands it differently and is trying to do something else. That's a learning opportunity for potentially new features or enhancements. There is the whole connection of product metrics to customer retention and churn prediction. So analyzing not just the feature adoption, if you will, but also things like return visits. Which of my customers, or how many of my customers, what percent are returning to the platform every day, every week, every month? It kind of varies by use case, which you want to optimize for. But if you've got a product that's supposed to be used on a daily basis and most of your customers are using it once a week at most, then there's a problem that needs to be addressed. So this is where things like segmenting customers based on their health, again, based on the specific software in question, comes into play. You can break down your customers into the healthy, happy, highly active users, the low risk, the low activity users, and then the ones who are hardly using it all. And then you can personalize engagement either in the product or outside of the product using email or personal follow-ups or multiple strategies to try to bring those up to a healthy, bring those into the healthy segment.
You also get a situation where you can find out if people are actually using the software or if perhaps they've started trying a competitor software. So it's kind of good. I get a good idea to track and see what your customers are doing.
Yep, absolutely. That's a big part of churn is understanding what if they're not using your solution, what solution are they using? Because the problem doesn't go away just because they're not using your software. And finally, identifying growth opportunities. This is more for more mature companies where finance and kind of understanding where revenue is coming from and what's driving revenue is a bigger focus for them. So tying in those customer insights and the product usage metrics to customer lifetime value, understanding which features drive adoption, willingness to pay, and growth into premium and enterprise tiers.
Now, all of this is kind of interesting to the AV world right now because we're at a very unique point in time as to what's going on in AV. We had talked a few years ago in the industry about smart buildings, but nothing ever really happened because there wasn't really a lot of things to do. We'd be able to get data coming back from a room. Is it utilized? Is it not utilized? Too large? Too small? We'd look at that in retrospect. But we're now kind of getting to the point where those silos are breaking down and we're adding AI into the mix. And we're now able to understand if there are people in a room and what activity can be taken if they are or if they aren't in that room. A lot of really interesting pieces coming together around this between, acquisitions. We're a very prominent building management company is bought into a programming company. And, the fact that cameras and video cameras and room systems now themselves can be sensors, can do people count even when they're not on a call. So you have the dedicated room sensors and you have video conference cameras going on. You have a lot of larger companies now talking about how are they going to manage this intelligence, all of this data that exists, not just with what's scheduled, but with what's actually happening in these sites. And it brings us up to a couple of very unique opportunities in the space where the same type of monitoring that you're involved in as a SaaS software company would relate to an AV hardware company and even organizations that use the AV hardware.
Absolutely, David. And that's something that happens at multiple levels. We talked about different players in the supply chain and different timeframes as well. So let's talk about a few use cases or a few different ways that this could apply to the AV industry. So for manufacturers, I think the use case that we've been hearing about the most is just the ability to understand, is our product design going in the right direction? We talked about software companies putting out software, and day one, you already get feedback on who is using what, how often, friction, success, things of the sort. For a hardware company, that's much more difficult. You put out a piece of hardware, you show it on demos and trade floors, and you sell it, but that feedback is definitely not as immediate and not as real time as it is in software. So a question that I've heard a few times is, do we really need 4 HDMI ports on our displays? Right? We put them out there because that's what our competitors are doing. That's what we've been hearing that people are asking for. But at the end of the day, are people actually using those 4 display ports, or are they a waste most of the time? With analytics today, with getting this information back from devices, you can actually see from those 4 display ports that you have out, you could get statistics on how many of them are being used and how often. Maybe there are different industries or verticals or use cases where there is a need for more display ports and cases where there are fewer, and that could inform future product design. For integrators or dealers, people kind of in the managed services space, so there's the whole idea of understanding or being able to demonstrate what kind of value they provide to their end customers. This kind of information is things like how many incidents have we identified and resolved within, say, the past month or quarter or whatever time frame you're looking at? How fast did we respond to them? Which devices are failing? What did we do about them? Do we have any problems with specific types of devices or specific rooms or things that are recurring? And this is no longer kind of hearsay or anecdotal based on the things that were most prominent in the discussion between the customer and the integrator during the month. This is based on hard data. So even if someone had a hunch or a feeling that something was being resolved within an insufficient or unreasonable amount of time, or that things were breaking left and right, now there's hard data to back up what has actually happened. And in cases where integrators say, well, we really are underperforming, there's something that they can do about it and measure the outcome of those actions that they take. And then finally, for the end users themselves, the IT or the AV teams that actually have to use the hardware day in, day out, conference rooms, digital signal processors, what have you. Oftentimes it's that troubleshoot something when something goes down and someone's impacted by it. So someone will go into a conference room and say, hey, the display isn't working, the cable's unplugged, we're not able to use the room. Impact has already happened. With data coming in from these devices, that information, the device saying, hey, there's no cable plugged into, the camera cable is unplugged, that can be noticed or that can be alerted 7 a.m. that morning. So when the first IT or AV person comes in, they can go and take a look at not all the rooms on the floor or in the building, but the ones that they've received alerts for, and then handle those incidents before they actually impact anyone in the business.
And in fact, some of the new systems coming to market today not only will be able to give you that information, there's a cable unplugged or the system's not working. In many cases, it can actually resolve the problem. It can say, I noticed that in conference room 14, that's scheduled for a call in 2 hours, I'm on the wrong input. So I switched it to the right input. Or over the weekend, there was a 0-day bug that was noticed in the systems, and I had to do a firmware update. So I've updated all of the systems. So it's not just alerting the staff that's coming in. It's got two additional functions. It's alerting staff that may not be qualified to come and say, well, you have to go to this device, this port, this thing, and do that. So now you don't have to have as high a level staff there. And in many cases, as I said, it's able to fix the problem itself. So these are new systems, new companies coming to market that are actually doing some of this based on the analytics.
Absolutely. David, how about a real world use case?
Well, there are a couple. I mean, let's talk about ones that existed, for a while and ones that are just coming to market right now. So the ones that have existed for a while, we used to in AV build very large rooms. That's just the kind of thing we did with big, complicated touch panels, lots of programming, lots of gear. But most of the time you'd walk through the halls, these large rooms would be underutilized for a lot of different reasons. They're the executives' room, or we didn't feel like it was appropriate because it was 3 or 4 people that were looking for a space to meet and they didn't have one. The industry reacted to that for the few years before the pandemic and since now, but there isn't any real data that's provided to you unless you're looking at actual utilization. How many times has this room that holds 14 people had meetings with 3 people in it? How many times did they use the gear versus they just needed a meeting room? And vice versa. How many times did the 6 person meeting room have people standing against the walls because there were no chairs available? So we've always had that ability coming back with this data that we could look at it in retrospect and decide that this is a underutilized or overutilized, and we need to right size our room complement, our meeting size, meeting room capabilities to match what the actual use case needs are of the organization. What we're getting today is actually even more than that. Now we have a situation where if I've booked an auditorium that holds 200 people all week and nobody shows up, why should I be air conditioning that room? Why should I be turning the lights on? Why should I be wasting all of that energy if I can, in fact, notice that there's nobody in the room? Let's shut it down. Let's save that money. Or vice versa. If 20 people walked into a conference room that was not scheduled to be used, hey, I noticed there are 20 people in the room. Let's turn the air on. Let's turn the lights on. Let's work on it. Just the ability to actually save the energy that's not needed in rooms that are not utilized, because we're not looking just at reservations anymore. We're looking at actual utilization data coming back. That often pays for itself in terms of the cost of putting in these types of management systems.
Yep, and it's the kind of information that comes in, the kind of data that's coming back from devices that really lets you kind of start to think about all the potential use cases and even who should configure, who should set up that logic. We're talking about things where these can be provided by manufacturers, but potentially there's no reason why it shouldn't be the integrators or the end users who configure this logic on top of all the data coming in. So here are just a few examples of data that can be we can pick up from devices reporting things like uptime, downtime, performance for the computers running underneath, so CPU, memory, network bandwidth, if they have any kind of sensors for temperature or for CO2 concentration or volatile organic compounds, occupancy sensors, motion sensors, uh, firmware versions, and as well as any kind of custom device reported event. It could be, a paper drawer left open on an Epson printer. All that kind of information can be used to configure then kinds of behaviors, whether they be automatic or not, to make things happen based on any use case. It could be for university, it could be for a corporation, it could be for a disco club.
Mhm. Oh, and I don't want to belabor the point, but I do want to call out that the era that we're living in right now, obviously, is the era of artificial intelligence and AI and a lot of machine learning systems. So what we now have is a marriage of data coming from these rooms being reported to the cloud, being reported to the management service. We have this logic that you were just describing, so things can be done. And now we have AI that can potentially act on it. So it is the difference between getting a notice saying, "Hey, I noticed that the cable's unplugged in this room, go look at it," to, "Hey, I noticed there's nobody." It's not telling you that there's nobody in the room. It's saying there was nobody in the room, so I shut the lights off. And over the course of a year, how much money that saves, or air conditioning, or making the room available again, so people aren't going crazy looking for space. All this comes back and is now available with AI being the glue that brings all of this together. It's definitely this ability for analytics to come in and AI to act on it that we've never lived through before. This is all brand new.
Yeah, and it's this structuring, it's the availability of the data and the structuring and understanding of use cases that then allow AI to act as an additional layer on top of either the raw data or logic, some kind of intermediate logic layer that could be that where all that value is coming from. So it's you can configure it yourself if you know exactly what you want, or you can throw all the data into AI, see what it suggests, and see is that something that makes sense for you or not.
Yeah. Now,
Excellent.
let's talk about some of the data collection and capabilities, because some of these have been around for a very long time. We've been able to put occupancy sensors in the ceilings and under tables and rooms for a very long time. But now, as I pointed out, a lot of the video conferencing systems that are in the rooms have additional capabilities. They will give you people count. They will give you activity even when they're not in a call. We've now got, companies out there that are starting to make dedicated sensors just for AV, just for these type of collaboration systems that are out there. And many of these systems are now doing more than just counting people. Some of them are giving you oxygen levels. Some of them are giving you CO2 levels, which tells you, if CO2 is high in a room, needs more ventilation. Maybe it needs a break. Maybe the windows should be open. There are ways of, you can interpret that meetings are not going well based on some of the environmental conditions that are coming in. And if that's a consistent problem in a room, you can look at it based on that. There are also now device monitoring platforms out there. Obviously, traditional AV management and monitoring systems that are out there. But now you also can tell if your assets are there. You can tell if a piece of equipment has been taken from a room. You know that immediately. If something has gone down and you're working with a ticketing system, same thing about warranties and getting updates and firmware. Revisions to equipment. There's a lot of things being pushed out on a regular basis right now. You can collect all of this data or only bits of it or only what your systems need. There's a big wide variety of it out there.
Yeah, and this is a good opportunity to talk a bit about what we do at Excite because that ties into a lot of what we've been talking about today. So if you're using all these different occupancy sensors and displays and cameras and speakers and there's so much AV equipment out there, it's really hard if you have to manage all the different parts of it in different software. So different cloud software or different on-prem software. Ultimately, it also means that the ability to kind of integrate everything and to say there's a problem with the room rather than the problem with the device is limited. So a lot of what we do at Excite is bringing all of that data into a single platform where we bring data from cloud-enabled devices and very soon from on-prem devices as well to a single point where we can say we have all the data and now we're visualizing on top of that, what is that data saying? What is the status of these different devices? Model them based on however they are dispersed in your building, among your customers in a way that's easy for you to manage and understand who am I servicing, what needs to happen before what are my priorities? And then when anything happens that requires your attention, we alert you on those incidents. Incidents can, as David mentioned before, can either be remotely remedied in many cases, either through sending commands to the device itself remotely. Sometimes it could be tunneling into the device if you need more granular controls. And then oftentimes you're able to not even have to send someone to the physical location to have that device taken care of. You're also able to see a history of how this individual device has been performing. Is this the first incident in 6 months, or is this the third incident this week? You'd probably respond to the issue differently based on that information, together with does this device sit in a small conference room that hardly anyone ever uses, or is it in the CEO's room? So that's on the MSP and AV slash IT team side. But Excite also has a platform to allow to have device manufacturers build their cloud platform on top of our on top of Excite. So if you're a manufacturer considering how you can bring your devices to the cloud to be monitored alongside and to take part in this emerging ecosystem, there's obviously the build it yourself option, which is challenging, takes a lot of time, money, and expertise, and no small struggles along the way. And there's also the option to buy a pre-made solution or not entirely off the shelf, but a solution like Excite that essentially provides you a platform and the guidance and the expertise to do it within a much shorter amount of time for a much smaller investment. So I think we've covered everything we plan to cover. If there are any questions, we're happy to get them in the Q&A. Okay, first question coming in. Do you need an internal BI or data analytics function? Where do I start if I don't have budget for such a function? How do I get insights from the data? So in the state of things today, you really need someone to help you make kind of wrangle the data, make sense of it, and then understand what it means. So there are kind of two different aspects of this. Someone who can get the data, put it in one place, and start slicing and dicing it. That really is more of an analyst or sorry, a BI function that needs to be someone who understands data. The other side of that is someone who knows how to ask good questions or someone who can work with stakeholders, with management, with customers to understand what are we looking for to answer with the data. So being able to pull the correct metrics, present them in the right way, the right graphs, the right timeframes, the right aggregation levels, those are things that if you can find one person who can do both the data side plus the analysis and insight side, you're golden. That's your person. If not, sometimes it needs to be two people. But essentially today, what you need is a consultant of some form who can put the data in a usable format, and then an analyst who can draw insights from those data working with stakeholders.
If someone is working with you guys at Excite, is that something you can either steer them to or help them with?
Absolutely. That's something that we're doing today with our customers, trying to pull those reports together and see what's useful to them. And hopefully in the future, it'll be something that becomes some kind of standard and becomes self-service. Okay, second question. Can you give me more details about how room and system scheduling has changed in a hybrid working world? David, I think this one's for you. How can organizations access useful data now that people are working remotely?
Well, yeah, it's an interesting thing because scheduling, I mean, if you go back, how many decades in my career, sometimes there'd be a sign-up sheet or a book outside a room and you'd put your name on it and you'd say, I booked this room for this time, or there would be an admin in charge of individual rooms. And then obviously we moved to some either spreadsheets or calendaring where we would be able to track that information. But it's different now because it's not, I need a room, what room's available today. Now it's I'm not working in the office today. I'm working in the office next Thursday. So I need to schedule a desk, not just a room. And I might need to schedule a locker because, the desk that I have doesn't have any storage area. I might be bringing a pet in. There's a large company outside of the US that has kennels on each floor. So you can have one dog per floor. And that might need to be booked. You might need to book a parking spot. So it's more than just rooms. It's actually kind of figuring out where you will be on any given day. And without the data and the analytics coming back to you on this, we would be lost because you're not getting the same people in that same office building every day. You're getting people that are traveling from city to city. You're getting people that are sometimes working from home or working with clients out in the field or working in an office. And we now need these scheduling systems to be aware of that. And we're starting to see a number of manufacturers in the space adapt to that and come up with the idea of, now I want to be able to tag everybody that's nearby me today to see who's around. That's a feature that Microsoft just came out with. And there are other customized features that can be done for you, again, as long as your systems are being monitored with a cloud SaaS type platform. So it is definitely different, and it will continue to be different. We're never going to go back to, no matter what you hear, reading the newspapers or hear being pushed forward, we're never going to go back to 100% return to office world. This hybrid piece is going to be around for a very long time.
Yeah, I think so too. And I think it's also important to add that as hardware and scheduling systems and everything here starts to adapt in the hardware space, that's going to have to play nice with all the existing hardware and the new hardware. So it's one big ecosystem, and all the interplay that happens between them. There really needs to be a place where you can manage everything end to end and automate and connect the logic and have it all sit in one place rather than working on different fragmented systems with limited capabilities.
Yeah, and Johnny, somebody put in a question. This is almost like a softball for you. I bet you paid for it. What's the advantage to getting this from a company like yours, like Excite, versus a manufacturer building it themselves? What's the advantage to the manufacturer? What's the advantage to the end users when manufacturers have done that?
Absolutely. So for the advantage to the manufacturer, I think is at least twofold. One is the time. Oftentimes, manufacturers go into this adventure not knowing how complicated it really is, and they spend a lot more time, a lot more resources, maybe a few careers impacted along the way, bringing this project to fruition. So the complexity, bringing in the experience, the expertise, right? So manufacturers, hardware manufacturers are hardware companies. They do hardware, they do firmware, but software and cloud software, cloud computing is a whole new area for them most times. You're talking about security and data storage and regulations and compliance. Um, Things that Excite has built in essentially. We're SOC 2 Type 2 certified, a bit more on the security side, but anything to do with kind of setting up everything that's not the main functionality, the authentication, the security, those are all things that really require deep expertise. So in terms of, I've mentioned complexity, timelines, obviously, if you're coming into a platform that's basically ready, here are APIs, get your firmware engineers to start writing to those APIs. That's going to be much faster than building everything yourself. So we're talking about orders of magnitude. We're talking about something that could be ready and you could have your first models out cloud monitored within 2 to 3 months, as opposed to maybe a year, year and a half at best, if you're going to set this up yourself. And I think last but not least is a matter of cost. You're going to be hiring much fewer engineers. You're going to have much of that basically part of the software that you purchase off the shelf. So I hope that answers that. And I see we've got another question about, is there a standard pull on data when it comes to the Excite platform, or is it based on their hardware? So we pull in data from multiple different methods. We're just adding a new method as we speak. It's our biggest project at the moment. So there are things that are natively monitored on Excite, manufacturers who have built their hardware monitoring capabilities. Their cloud essentially is an Excite cloud, and those we connect to natively. The devices basically communicate with Excite servers. It's baked into the firmware. That's one. Another type are devices that come in through a third-party cloud. Best example of that is Zoom or Teams, where there's already a cloud that's used to monitor those systems. So rather than have those manufacturers start to build all over on Excite, we pull the data from their cloud. So essentially, much of the data that you could get from Zoom or Teams, you could also get in Excite. With Excite, you could just manage Zoom alongside, Biamp, Symmetrix, Crestron, many additional types of manufacturers. The last one is on-prem. It's the devices that don't have any cloud connection, need to go through some kind of proxy or gateway or something that sits locally on the network and communicates with Excite. That's Excite Edge, which we're hard at work on at the moment. And that should cover, I think, most types of devices, except for the ones that are literally offline and not even connected to a network. Those you could also manage as assets, but again, it's not data, it's not a connected device, so those are a bit different. Last one is, unless anyone has any additional questions, how can an in-house team ensure that the device data is secure? So as mentioned, Excite is SOC 2 Type 2 compliant. That means that all data that is sent to Excite servers stands up to the highest standards of compliance as far as cloud computing is today. Without getting too much into the details, we have white papers explaining in detail, and we're always happy to hop on calls and explain to security teams how secure this information is. Essentially, we're aligned with industry standards the same way that banking is also slowly moving into cloud computing because they understand that that's the standard and that's the future, even though 10 years ago, no bank would be willing to have its data not on-prem. Device information is stored and secured the exact same way. All right. So if there are no further questions, then we're going to leave this as a closing slide with David's information, with my information. If you'd like to follow up, if you'd like to hear about Excite, if you're a manufacturer, if you're an integrator offering or looking to offer managed services, if you're an AV team looking for a better way to manage all your device fleet, feel free to get in touch with me, with anyone on the Excite team, and we'll be happy to reach out and understand what we can do for you.
Anybody wants to reach out to me, my number's there. I love speaking to people in the industry. I'd be happy to talk about what Excite means to me.
All right. Thanks, everyone. David, thank you so much for joining us. It's been a pleasure talking to you, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, Johnny. You too. Thanks, everyone.